Hi guys, so this is the first part of our new theme, Global Trends. As you know, as publishers, we don't function in isolation. We also form part of a bigger global system. And although we as a country have various challenges and opportunities in our publishing industry, we are also influenced by the bigger macro environment from a global point of view as well. And we interconnect and we have a lot of ties, especially with the British publishing system, the UK, because of colonialization, for example. All right, I'm going to mix this up. So I'm going to try and give you, a few narrated PowerPoint presentations. I'll put in other different kinds of videos and presentations as well, and we'll see how it goes. But for now, I think it's best if you can get yourself comfy, get a nice place to sit, put your earphones in and listen. Also make notes so that we can discuss it afterwards, or if you do have any questions. And just it always helps to sit and read. When you read something, I'm not there to now really interact with you guys in class, so it helps if you have a notepad and you can write down as you listen to what I talk about. You can also download this presentation and then you can refer back to it if need be. All right, so the global publishing industry. As I said, all of the publishing industries are part of a global publishing industry. So, even in Africa, where we have our own thing going, we still form part of the bigger and the global publishing industry. There are still books being imported, exported, translated, repackaged in films. There are books that are distributed overseas. We import books from the UK and the US, like our international bestsellers of fiction, etc., etc. So it's all interlinked in different languages and different ways that we communicate with the global publishing industry, which makes it actually a very lively and interesting industry. When you look at the table on the right-hand side, you'll see that the biggest publishing industries at this stage, or countries, is first of all China, and then USA, and then the UK, France, and Germany. I'm not really that surprised by France and Germany. I'm a little bit surprised by the Netherlands. I thought they'd be higher up. But yes, Spain as well is a big market because of, if you think about the language that they speak, in German, French, we know that those are big publishing industries. What's interesting to me is Kenya there at the bottom. That's the first time that any kind of African country comes up on this list, is number 25, Kenya. And we have to go and actually look what makes this interesting. Why is this African country actually in the top 30 of, the global publishing industry? What is it that they're doing? What are they producing? Why? And maybe they have secrets that can actually help us. All right, or not really secrets, but systems and processes that we can learn from. The USA, UK, and China are the biggest markets. Now, the UK and the US, that is not really a surprise because those are English language markets. And the English language market is obviously the biggest because English is the language of business and education. And it is also the language that occupies the most central or dominant position if you look at the polysystem of language, which means that it's the language that is most translated into and out of, because it's the most accessible, I guess. It's a lot of people's, although it's not all people's first language, it can be a second or a third or a fourth language even. The reason with China as well is, yes, not just because of the population, but China has been a market that's been coming up on the radar for a couple of years now already. And they've also adopted to use English more, which makes it quite interesting because that immediately opens up the publishing industry, and it increases the market share that the English language has on the world. So China, definitely big competitor, UK, US. All right, so the International Publishing Association publishes reports regularly. In research terms, regularly can mean 4 to 5 years, ago. So I'm very glad that we could find these stats, although it's not updated. It's not 2020. It would also be interesting to see after COVID what happened to certain publishing industries and countries, but we'll get to that, especially if you think about Italy. All right, and so as I mentioned, the English markets are usually the biggest markets, and those are the kind of language groups that everyone wants to publish in. Right, so that brings us to the British publishing system. South Africa was, due to colonialization, South Africa has close ties to the Dutch and to the British. Mostly the British. They even, Beth talked to you guys about the missionary publishers and people coming to South Africa, to Africa, and working in our languages. But obviously, English has been a huge part of our country and its language policy and the way the language developed and the people in our country developed. Afrikaans was only declared an official language in, I shouldn't lie now, 1925, which is actually quite recent if you think about it. At that same time, it was always English and Dutch that was used. So we definitely have close ties with them. Also, if you look at the South African publishing industry and you see how many bestsellers and fiction titles we import from the UK, which Jonathan Ball does as a company, and then the way we do things and structure and our models and business methods and ways are very similar to the UK formats and editions and ways they do things in terms of publishing. But anyway, so we have close ties, and I just think it's important that you guys remember that, and that there are still a lot of multinationals in South Africa due to colonialism so many years ago. So the publishing industry, and especially the British, but I think it's a lot like that in German, French, Italy as well, countries where it was traditionally more family-owned businesses. And after the war and recessions and, depression and all of these factors, where people actually struggled to make money and make it commercially viable, a lot of the bigger companies actually came in. If you think about industrialization and everything that happened after that, bigger companies with money came in to save little family-owned businesses. And today we are mostly, we are a very strong commercial industry. And but it's just important that you know that it's not to say that there are not, that these little family-owned businesses don't exist anymore, but it is not as prominent as it used to be many years ago. Interestingly, the first 4 publishers, top trade publishers, bring in 50% of the income of that British publishing industry, which is very interesting. Top 4 companies in the whole of the UK bring in 50%, which just shows you how big of a monopoly these bigger guys have, or the multinationals have. Mega corporations, Bertelsmann, I'm sure you guys have heard of that before. Remember that even our book club, Leserskring Leisure Books, has its origins in that business model. Then you have Hachette Livre, Pearson, HarperCollins, Pan Macmillan. We have a Pan Macmillan South Africa as well. And Time Warner, Bloomsbury, Simon & Schuster. Some of these names you would recognize. If not, go and Google, see what they publish, see what they do. Look at the books that are on your bookshelf. Sometimes it's really interesting. I always like to look at the little logos of publishing houses and how they have changed over the years. Right. Then, so another very important thing that happened in quite a few, in recent times, is obviously Brexit, and you should have heard this before in the news, and if you're not familiar with this whole term, I'll explain it now in a few sentences, but you can read up on it. It's really interesting. But basically it is that Britain doesn't want to be part of the European Union anymore, and whereas the European Union included a few countries and they had the same, like currency, legal systems, governing systems, etc., whereas now England wants to step away from that and say we want to be independent and we do not actually want to form part of this. This obviously influences a lot of other legal and political situations and factors, right? So England does not want to be part of the European Union anymore. What are the consequences of this for the industry? All right, if you think you're a publisher based in England and now you want to trade with other countries in Europe, there are certain legislation and treaties and exchanges and things that are dependent on national governing bodies, and now being part of this European Union means something. All right, there are pros and there are cons. If you now want to withdraw from that agreement or from that union, what does that do? And obviously on different levels this has an influence, but especially in publishing as well. Just imagine how many people import, export English books, how many selling of rights, and how many content is generated between these countries. How does this actually influence all of these things? All right, it was said that the process, administrative and legal matters, would actually be finalized by this year, December 2020, but obviously are there delays now due to the coronavirus, and that this process may be delayed. So we do not know when this whole Brexit situation will have, dissolved, or well, not dissolved, but would have basically finished and all the loose ends would be tied up. We don't know that yet, but there's a very interesting article on how Brexit could destroy the UK publishing industry. So that would give you guys a little bit of insight in terms of what is happening, what exactly is Brexit, how does it influence the publishing industry, because to some of you guys you may think, what does that even, what does that have to do with anything? But remember, as a publishing industry, you're part of a global system. There are various things that happens in different countries that would influence you. If you think back in the day with apartheid, there were a lot of international publishing houses that did not want to do business with South Africa due to the apartheid government at that time. So, that's just one example, but there are, and censorship. So there are just so many things that has an influence actually on the publishing of your books. It's not just that. So I think it's good to read this article and really familiarize yourself about not just about this situation about Brexit and the UK publishing, but just think about publishing in a bigger context. Like, we are South African publishing industry, but where do we actually fit in a bigger picture? If this country should do this, how does this influence us? If that country should do that, how does this influence us? And I think this article really just helps to put yourselves in the context of a larger or bigger system. All right. So I hope that